Welcome, everybody. Thanks for joining us. I'm Diana Tysinger. I'm STLI's Assistant Director of Learning Innovation, and I'm going to talk to you a little today about writing better alt text. If you want to follow along, you can use that short URL there that's on this slide or scan the QR code to grab the slides. If you're not sure yet, but you see something later on that interests you, there will be a couple of additional opportunities to grab these slides, and then we typically send them out afterwards as well. So we want you to have them and the speaker notes that go with them. We're going to talk a little bit about what digital accessibility is, why it matters, STLI's approach to digital accessibility, because I like to give those disclaimers every time that I'm in front of faculty and co-educators at William & Mary. I'll define alt text for you and give you some really specific concrete examples of how to write really clear, specific alt text that's the appropriate level of detail. And then, as always, we're going to close with what can I do in Blackboard to make my courses more accessible? And I'll preview a couple of resources and events that are coming up. So what is digital accessibility and why does it matter? When we use this term digital accessibility, we're generally referring to websites, tools, and technologies that are designed and developed in a way that people with disabilities can use them. However, we know that anytime we engage in this work to make our content more accessible, we're benefiting all types of learners, not just learners with disabilities. We also have this motto at William & Mary, a core value that who comes here belongs here. So that includes people who might need to access your content in different ways, or in the case of alt text today, I'll use the example of people who have a slow internet connection and images aren't loading. Alt text is also supportive and helpful for them. We also know that students, when they get to college, don't always disclose the needs for things like alternative text or accommodations. Some of them want to see how they can do without engaging with SAS, and that usually, when they try the sink or swim method, we know that the sinking typically happens at a time that's really inconvenient for instructors, like right around midterms. At STLI, we're always going to encourage you to be proactive and to design with learner variability in mind from the beginning, so that if a student later discloses a need for accommodation, you have already done the work to make your content accessible. It is also required. We have a deadline, a federal deadline coming up in April 2026 that states that all digital content will need to be accessible for those with hearing, vision, cognitive, and manual disabilities. You've seen, I'm sure, some work around campus that is focused on making the physical space of campus more accessible. Our work here today and what STLI has been involved with, along with our colleagues in IT and libraries, is really focused on making digital content more accessible for learners. This is STLI's policy about, or position statement about digital accessibility. I'm not going to read the whole thing, but I do want to highlight for you that we, again, are really encouraging instructors, co-educators to create accessible digital course content from the start and to be reasonable in the changes that you make to increase accessibility. We're looking for progress over perfection and trying to stay away from scare tactics about trying to be 100% perfect, because that's probably not an achievable goal. Accessibility is a moving target. We just want to get a little bit better where we can. So today we're talking about alt text. What is alt text? If you want to take a deep dive, you can click on that link, but let me summarize for you what you'll find if you do. Alt text, or alternative text, replaces images with descriptions that help users with visual or certain cognitive disabilities perceive the content and the function of the images. Both of those elements are important, content and function. So I want you to think about, for example, an image of a maple leaf. It could be a symbol of the Canadian flag, or it could be a symbol of the changing of seasons, or it could be a decorative border. So the kind of context of how you're using images is important, and you're going to see some examples of that a little bit later here. And then I alluded to this earlier, but if we're talking about content that's hosted on the web, occasionally we've encountered in an email or on a website that the image fails to load. Maybe, the IT spam blockers said, this is suspicious, we don't recognize the sender, and the images didn't load in your email. Alternative text provides another way of conveying meaning about the content and the function of those images. So this isn't just for students who might have, or people who might have a vision-related disability. It also benefits people when an image doesn't load properly. You're going to find it here when you right-click or two-finger tap if you're using a touchpad. Anytime there is an image in Word, in PowerPoint, in Google Slides. I don't know what it looks like in Cascade because I opted out of the web team for STLI. But in most environments, you're going to see some kind of menu where you can attach alternative text or alt text to specific images. I did a basic quick bite on this a few weeks back, and I think Adam's going to drop the link to that in the chat if you're interested in kind of just getting the how-to of where to go to add alt text. So how do I write it? If you want to read the full article about how do I write it and see many, many more examples than what we have time to go through today, you can click on that link when you get these slides. But let's look at some basics. First of all, alt text is short, usually just 1 or 2 sentences. Don't overthink it. We do want to think about content and function, but we don't need to write a dissertation in the alt text box. Really think about why did you choose this image? So it's not necessary to describe every detail of the image, although we will see some examples that are quite detailed. In general, we're kind of explaining the context of how this functions in a document, why you thought it was important to include this image. And sometimes the answer is, it's not important, it was decorative. We'll look at an example of that too. Don't start your alternative text descriptions with image of or picture of, because if someone is using a screen reader, when the screen reader detects that alternative text or that image and reads the alt text, the screen reader technology already knows that it's detected an image. And so most of them will start off reading image of, and then whatever you entered for the alt text. So if you start your description with image of or picture of, you can imagine that's going to be a little bit redundant for somebody who's listening with a screen reader. This is a new one for me that I just learned as I was researching and preparing to talk to you all today about this topic. Don't duplicate adjacent text. This makes sense if you think about what the user experience would be for a student who's reliant on a screen reader. So I had given the advice in the past to, if the figure that or the graph or the chart that you are providing alt text for has a caption or a description beneath it, you could just copy and paste from there. But actually the guidance is not to do that, because what will happen for a learner who is reliant on a screen reader is that they'll have to listen to that whole paragraph of information in the alternative text description of the image, and then listen to it again underneath as the screen reader reads the caption or the text-based description. So really you want the two to be complementary. And then it's so tempting when you see your alt text descriptions to just mark it as decorative because it's really fast. You don't have to do any thinking, but we really discourage you from doing that. We encourage you to think about what is the learner's experience, particularly if they are reliant on a screen reader. If they get to something and it's marked as decorative, but their sighted classmates are actually deriving meaning and meaningful learning from the same image. And then consider cases where AI might be helpful. We are increasingly seeing in Microsoft Word and PowerPoint, and even in Blackboard, an AI assistant will suggest alternative text. It's tricky though, because you have the discernment as the creator of these documents to know about the function of those images, the why that you included them, and AI doesn't have that context. Even though it can sometimes seem like a mind reader, it's not. So really be discerning when you're looking at an AI-generated suggestion. You might use it as a starting point if that's part of your workflow, but I wouldn't just assume, oh, AI can take care of this, check, 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 and move on. All right, let's look at some examples, because that's what you're here for, the practical application pieces. This is an example. The source is in the speaker notes for this, so I'm not claiming original credit for this. I'm just repurposing and shining a light on it for our audience here at William and Mary. So that source is linked if you want to see some more examples than we have time for today. So helpful alt text for an image like this. Again, the function of this image is to share some information about an event and to direct people how to use this to go register for the event if they're interested. So in that case, it's really important to include detailed alternative text that includes the information that a sighted reader would get from this, which is, in this case, the dates and the times and the prompt to register. It's not as helpful to say event details with registration button, even though that does describe, especially for a sighted reader, what this is an image of. It doesn't convey enough detail to kind of level the playing field for somebody who is reliant on a screen reader compared to somebody who is not. Let's look at another example. This is for we're looking specifically at the portion of this figure that is the keyboard, the fingers on the keyboard here. So in this case, this is an example of where the image could be set to decorative, assuming that the accompanying text is accessible via screen reader. So if a screen reader can read, now that you have completed this course, you should be able to do the following, then it's okay to mark the accompanying image here as decorative. A couple of additional notes here that the reason that it's okay to mark it as decorative is because the laptop does not convey meaning. And if you think about, again, leveling the playing field with a person who is sighted versus a person who is using a screen reader, they're getting the same content if this text is accessible by a screen reader. All right, this is one I get questions about a lot, charts and graphs, because there is a lot of detail going on, and how do we convey this in a way that is equitable for people? We see that the unhelpful level of description would be to say event sales graph, because there's a lot more content contained here. And then we have a couple of levels of detail of helpful description. So I want to point out the difference between the first helpful example and the second helpful example. The first one goes really fine, granular detail about each category and really would help a learner who is reliant on a screen reader interpret the data in this chart, even if they could not visually perceive the bars and the values. However, you see that depending on the context, and this is again where your discernment as an instructor comes in, depending on the structure of the content that you're sharing, it might be that the second example of helpful alt text is appropriate. It's less detailed and it directs readers or listeners to table 1 for further details about event sales by category. So we need to think holistically about, is there other information in this document and the surrounding text that's going to convey the same meaning that might warrant me being a little bit less descriptive in the alt text? Or is this image the one and only chance for learners to get the information? I'll pause here just for another example, a different type of chart to show that, a very, very brief description is not as helpful as something detailed enough to give equitable access for somebody who's reliant on a screen reader, or in a case where the image doesn't load. What about quizzes and tests? This is the question that we get all the time. You're going to be tired of hearing me say use discernment, but some of your expertise as an instructor or as somebody who's creating content for students, when we're assessing their learning, we're always deciding what level of detail do I give? How much do I share? If I'm testing people on the learning objective of making meaning from a visual object, there might not be another way to assess their learning other than relying on that visual object. And I'm going to talk about what to do if that is your scenario. So the term visual bias is what we would be thinking about if that's true for you. So if an item can only be answered by a sighted learner, is there another way to assess the learning? If the answer is yes, and we're going to look at some examples of this, if the answer is yes, there is another way to assess learning. It might be an example where you reduce the visual bias and you mitigate it by asking the question in a different way. However, there might be times when there is no other way to assess the learning based on the learning objective. And in that case, you would work with student accessibility services to address specific accommodations if that applies to you. Let's look at some examples and quizzes and tests, because obviously we don't want our alternative text to kind of give away the answer. I'll be upfront and transparent here and say I did use Claude AI for brainstorming some content-specific examples, since I am not a content expert in all different disciplines. I know it's hard to believe, but it's true. Let's say that your learning objective in a statistics class is to interpret statistical data to draw conclusions and infer trends. You might originally have had a question that said, based on the bar graph shown, which quarter had the highest sales? Now, we've already got some issues because we're only showing 3 of the 4 quarters. So a lot's gone wrong in the backstory here. But we might revise that question to avoid visual bias by still respecting the original learning objective, which in here was to interpret statistical data. It was not to interpret visual charts and graphs. And we might just present that data in a table format or other text-based format where students can then answer which quarter had the highest sales, but it won't be reliant on their ability to see different bars on a graph. I want to look at another example. This is a biology example. If the learning objective is to identify the functions of organelles in plant and animal cells, so again, we're not identifying them by sight. We're not identifying what different structures look like. The learning objective is I need my learners to know what are the functions of the organelles. If the original question says identify the cell organelle labeled A in the diagram, this is a question that contains a lot of visual bias. So we can revise that to a simple multiple choice or short answer, which organelle is responsible for protein synthesis. My learner still is being assessed on whether they can identify the functions of the organelles, but I've removed the visual bias. Let's look at an example where it doesn't work. If the learning objective in art history, for example, is analyze the use of perspective, light, and composition in this Renaissance painting, how does the artist create depth and direct the viewer's eye? There is not a way to assess this particular learning objective without this visual component. And so in this case, you'd be looking to work with our colleagues in SAS to find an alternative way to assess the learner's interpretation of these really important points of the course. So when visual analysis is the actual learning objective, there might not be a way to avoid visual bias. That's where we're looking for alternative assessments. And I'm thinking like maybe you're having a conversation with the student instead of assessing their ability to see, and you're talking through some of the concepts in class. That's really laborious, so we don't want to offer that necessarily to every single student, but if a student has a protected accommodation, that might be one way you'd be advised to approach that. Okay, I want to remind you that if you are sharing content with learners in Blackboard, there are 3 easy things that you can do right now to improve accessibility in those courses. First of all, delete unused files. If you've been in the habit of storing things for just treating Blackboard kind of like a file management system, now is your invitation to get those out of Blackboard and organize them in OneDrive if you never want to see them again, or on your desktop if you're like me and have way too many folders on your desktop. but find a way to manage them that doesn't confuse the Blackboard system about accessibility. Check your ally score. If you don't know how to do it, please ping me after this on Teams or Outlook, or schedule a consultation with somebody at STLI. We can all show you how to check your ally score. And then write in ally. If you have already checked your ally score, but you haven't looked recently, just within the last couple of months, Ally has added some functionality to be able to resolve issues with PDFs right in Blackboard without having to like download, use Adobe Pro to fix it, re-upload, none of that. You can scan it and make it machine readable. You can add a title, you can set the language without ever leaving your course. So that's really a huge functionality upgrade. And then if you want to learn more, please schedule a consult with STLI IT or libraries. We're all working together to make this more manageable for instructors and co-educators. Search for digital accessibility events at William & Mary's events page, because we have stuff going on all the time. And I know I have some frequent flyers in the room. And then if you're in a department where you feel like your colleagues would benefit from a little deeper dive to look at specific things related to your content, schedule a roadshow with us and we'll come to you and present some more detailed information about ways to make your content more accessible.